Trump just called Somalis garbage on national TV, and everyone's up in arms, but this is classic Trump. The American people needed to be aware of something, and if they're not paying close attention, he's got to hook them in somehow.
Ilhan Omar is garbage.
Here's the underlying message, though. Democrats don't want immigrant groups to assimilate into America. Multiculturalism, that salad bowl, not melting pot stuff, sounds nice, but it really just means that immigrants who come to America are not shedding their cultural practices from the country they emigrated from and are not embracing American values. Why do Democrats feel this way? Well, it could be toxic empathy, the idea that we should turn a blind eye to serious cultural incompatibility so as not to offend an identity group. But I actually think it's intentional. The fact is that America has a national language and national creed, the Constitution, the rule of law, freedom of expression, press, etc. To come here, you must subscribe to all of that, first and foremost, before anything else. Full stop. Democrats say that's xenophobic. To be honest, I think what Democrats really want is maximum cultural chaos and disorder. They hate America's national identity that the Founding Fathers enshrined, and they want to break it down. Let's lock in.
The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. Our country's at a tipping point.
All right, so we got to take the emotional knee-jerk reaction blinders off for a second and realize that Somalia has problems. It has ongoing political instability, conflict, corruption. Trump doesn't want those problems coming here. More on that in a second.
And we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain.
Look, it's been Trump's position since 2016 that America is done being a charity for the world. And from his vantage point, America is far from being a strong nation that it used to be when he was building his New York City skyline and his empire. And importing people who are straining our resources, which we have the data to back that up, it's going to make us weaker.
They came from paradise and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell and they complain and do nothing but bitch, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
I don't care if you think that's the most inflammatory thing that's ever been said about a group ever. That is what his base loves about him. The irreverence, the fact that he's just saying it like it is, he's not mincing words, he doesn't care who he insults. Yeah, that's the communication style they fell in love with. And about Ilhan Omar, he's also right. If the Somalis in the US wanted a good spokesperson to humanize them and their struggles from a war-torn country, she'd be the worst possible pick. She's insufferable. The latest is that dozens of Somali immigrants in Minnesota have just been charged with defrauding the state's social services programs to the tune of $1 billion. Large-scale, alleged fraud by 76 members of Minnesota's Somali community went completely unchecked since COVID. This involved creating shell companies and fronts to collect benefits, including creating fake autism centers that enrolled children whose Somali parents faked their autism to get checks from the Minnesota taxpayer. We covered all that in my last video, but the plot keeps thickening. This week, Trump announced he would end temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota, coming on the heels of this scandal. Trump's getting at this. Given their reliance on public assistance, Somalis are not blending into the fabric of America, especially Minnesota. Many of the Somalis here today first came over in the 1990s as part of that migration wave because of a diaspora. Somali was war-stricken, it was filled with issues, but Somalis are not necessarily parting with the expectations and customs of Somalia when they come here. Ahmed Samatar, a professor at Macalester College, told the New York Times in its write-up of the Minnesota fraud scandal that, quote, Somali refugees who came to the United States after their country's civil war were raised in a culture in which stealing from the country's dysfunctional and corrupt government was widespread. So beyond the theft from the taxpayer, there's also just plain using the taxpayer. The data currently shows that over 40% of Minnesota Somalis are on food stamps and unemployed, so leaning on the government to support them. And listen, it's not simply that Minnesota is seeing an influx of newcomers who are going to bring their gifts and talents to the upper Midwest. Like you're seeing in London and across Europe, Muslims and outsiders, key point here, who are acting contrary to Western culture are starting to gain political clout in some cities here in America. First and foremost, the face of it all, Ilhan Omar.
CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
In Omar's version, a Washington Post profile noted a few years ago, America wasn't the big-hearted country that saved her from a brutal war in a bleak refugee camp. It wasn't a meritocracy that helped her attend college or vaulted her into Congress. Instead, it was the country that had failed to live up to its founding ideals, a place that had disappointed her and so many immigrants, refugees, and minorities like her. So Ilhan Omar is ungrateful to the country that gave her a $30 million net worth because she ultimately married a venture capitalist. She's hostile to American values. Not only that, she may have briefly married her brother for financial benefits, and she's never definitively debunked the charges. Then we have Omar Fateh, the Mamdani of Minneapolis, who became a name in the mayoral race before he was defeated by Jacob Frey. More on him later. Also of Somali descent, Fateh is a communist who thinks we should bring a little third world economics here. He wants to abolish fossil fuels, abolish ICE cooperation, even for criminals, cancel rent, mortgage, and utilities, etc. Here's a sample of his campaign trail.
Congresswoman at the Shane.
Yeah.
But remember, Democrats hate the melting pot and love the salad bowl. They tell these communities, don't change, we support your culture. All of it. And so they pander. Here's Jacob Frey, who beat Omar Fateh, letting the Somalis know, hey, please don't hate me, I need your votes.
That's not American. That's not what we are about. And we're going to do right by every single person in our cities. And so, to our Somali community, Daman Shabka, Assimilate Kunul, Minnesota, Garahan, Minneapolis, Waan, Kuji Janilahai, Waan, Ku Gereb, Taganahan.
If Somalis in America are dependent on the government, they're easier to manipulate to vote for Democrats who are promising infinite social services. So this is an electoral strategy. Also, the mass influx of immigrants has created an underclass in America that's performing cheap labor for the elites, like being DoorDash drivers. That's another uncomfortable fact that Democrats don't want to admit. But a lot of these Minneapolis leaders are so desperate to pander to the Somalis living there, whom they need electorally, that they're willing to literally break federal law.
That they're not sure if they're law enforcement, that they may be kidnapping people. Like, we have had those reports. I want to be clear to the community. The community should know that if you see something like that, that is legitimate, that you don't know if someone is law enforcement, you should call 911. And you should provide as much information as possible, because let's not forget, we very recently had tragedy in this state by someone who was purporting to be law enforcement. So please, let's be clear. That's something everyone should report, and that we will immediately respond to, and we will document. Whether it's somebody's not sure if there's a kidnapping happening, somebody's not sure if that there's law enforcement present or not. And that's something else that's additional policy requirements that we are implementing, that we will document and report these types of things anytime that we hear it, and reminding our officers of their duty to intervene. So if there is anything that is, a violation of someone's human rights or civil rights, excessive force or anything like that, they absolutely have a duty to intervene as police officers.
I don't think so. Look, states have rights, localities have rights, but immigration is the federal government's domain. It's also in the Constitution as a plenary power, technically. And what we know is that if you as a locality, Minneapolis, intervene to obstruct ICE from conducting arrests, detainments of who they believe to be illegal aliens, maybe even with criminal records, you are violating federal law. You are allowed to refuse to cooperate with ICE, to give them some of your resources as a locality or a state entity, but you cannot block them. You cannot prevent them from doing their job. I don't understand why this cop, this police chief, is saying this on live TV. This is outright wrong. And as we know, the state of Minnesota is being run by the biggest clown of all, the guy who was responsible for allowing the massive fraud over COVID and beyond to happen, Tim Walz, because he was too busy running for vice president on the Democratic ticket.
Right-wingers are coming after you for how you handled your shotgun.
Well, I can shoot better than all of them. I guarantee it. I got the trophies to prove it.
This whole saga has opened up a can of worms about assimilation. What does it mean to really assimilate? Well, it means that an immigrant is self-sufficient here, that an immigrant isn't a public charge, meaning they don't depend on the government for assistance. And it's an immigrant who doesn't think they can reshape the country that welcomed them into the country they came from. Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on the state of Virginia, warned against taking in too many people from absolute monarchies who will bring with them, quote, the principles of the governments they leave imbibed in their early youth. He goes on, these principles, with their language, they will transmit to their children. In proportion to their numbers, they will share with us in legislation. Our laws and institutions must therefore be guarded with jealous attention, and in order to preserve them, we must incorporate our immigrants into the body of our people. In other words, fully assimilate these people. He didn't say shut it all down, cut off immigrants, but he was advocating to be very selective and slow about who we let in from foreign countries, especially those who may not share our values and laws. And the fact is that Minneapolis has a large Somali community with growing political clout. And we should ask ourselves if it's even good that groups think of themselves primarily as ethnic enclaves rather than as Americans. Not only that, the political representatives they've elevated, like Ilhan Omar, don't even like America. Omar is constantly railing against this country. She's so ungrateful to the American system that gave her refuge from a war-ravaged, desperately poor African nation. She came here with nothing, and now she has a fortune. You'd think she'd be more appreciative. Look, Trump's political career could probably be attributed to immigration, that one issue. And once again, he's not afraid to say what's on his mind. But the Trump administration in the first term had it right. They published a public charge rule, which greatly expanded immigrants' inadmissibility into the country based on their self-sufficiency. The bottom line was, if they're going to take government benefits, they couldn't come in. But of course, President Biden overturned the rule. In 2016, Trump ran on getting rid of the coyotes. The media ate that up. In 2024, Trump had to use the image of they're eating the cats and eating the dogs to get the message across. Now in 2025, Trump is determined to take out the garbage. If you think it's callous, fine, but he means those who come to America to undermine our country, who refuse to shed their past nations and wear the fabric of this one. And there are plenty, of course, nearly countless of examples of upstanding immigrants in America. This doesn't discount them. But Trump is right that America has the right to refuse anyone to come here, especially if they're unlikely to contribute to our society. But what do you think? Is Trump right to point out that the Somalis in Minnesota have an assimilation problem, even if he is using the phrase garbage to do so? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss out on future content.